Have you found your dream job as a developer? Or are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit the tech stack that you want to work with, and salaries go up to $130K. All you have to do is create a free profile, and you automatically get matched with jobs that fit your requirements. So what are you waiting for? Create your free profile and let companies apply to you now.
Zeiss. I think you should go to Zeiss.
Zeiss Digital Partners.
Be a maze of knowledge, industries, manufacturing, optics, hardware, software,
AR, VR,
Machine Learning,
infrastructure.
Ich will nicht aufstehen und irgendwie mir denken, scheiße, ich muss meinen Job machen, sondern was kann ich heute machen?
You will make it happen. Do it.
Have you found your dream job as a developer? Or are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit the tech stack that you want to work with, and salaries go up to $130K. All you have to do is create a free profile, and you automatically get matched with jobs that fit your requirements. So what are you waiting for? Create your free profile and let companies apply to you now.
Zeiss.
I think you should go to Zeiss.
Zeiss digital partners.
Be amazed of knowledge, industries, manufacturing, optics, hardware, software,
AR, VR,
Machine Learning.
infrastructure.
Ich will nicht aufstehen und irgendwie mir denken, scheiße, ich muss meinen Job machen, sondern was kann ich heute machen?
You will make it happen. Do it.
David Singleton! Good luck.
Hi, folks. So as you just heard, my name is David Singleton, and I am the CTO of Stripe. And today I want to talk with all of you about infrastructure. In my mind, infrastructure projects are defined by two key attributes. First, they are big, bold, and ambitious. They have the potential to shape the character of a region and the future of entire economies. And they can provide leverage to individuals at a massive scale. And second, no matter how big or breathtaking a piece of infrastructure is, it quickly fades into the background of our everyday lives. And this is a good thing. Great infrastructure is quiet and reliable. It helps people achieve their goals without getting in the way. And when we think about big infrastructure projects, some of the most obvious are in the realm of transportation. This is a picture of one of the entrances of the Channel Tunnel. And the construction of the Channel Tunnel was a phenomenal engineering feat. To this day, it is the longest continuous underwater tunnel in the world. And each year, more than 10 million people travel through the tunnel by rail, often along with their cars, goods, and very much more. But that's not the full story. For generations, people have looked across the channel and dreamed of better ways to link Britain to the European mainland. Prior to the 1800s, ships like this cutter were the primary means of transporting goods and services. In the mid-1800s, the famous Dover to Calais ferry via paddle steamer began its run. And starting in 1800, engineers, began trying to tunnel under the channel rather than sail over it. One of the very first plans came from mining engineer Albert Mathieu Favier around 1802, who proposed a tunnel that would be lit by oil lamps for stagecoaches. So, amazingly, construction on the first channel tunnel started in 1880 using these steampunk boring machines. But that was cancelled due to political pressure. And inside the present tunnel, by the way, you can actually still find graffiti that was left by the workers on that very first 1880 dig site. That was over 150 years ago, and I think it just goes to show that people love leaving Easter eggs in their work. Some interesting transit ideas were tried after World War II, and even when construction plans were being finalized in the 1980s, the British government was pushing hard for an alternative design that would have seen cars driving all 31 miles underground. And if that wasn't enough, at its completion, it wasn't even clear that the Channel Tunnel would be a financial success either. Not least because when the tunnels from the French and English sides finally met, the project was well over budget, having cost £9 billion rather than the forecasted $5.5 billion. But despite all these setbacks, despite all the delays and the cost overruns and the cancelled projects, the tunnel is a roaring success. And it's a success because of its obvious utility. It's a better way to move people from point A to point B. It's a success because it enables the value of other networks to compound too, like connecting high-speed rail between London and Paris, simplifying the cross-market movement of heavy goods vehicles, and even joining power transmission networks between the UK and Europe. And these network effects reach beyond Britain and France. It's made it possible, for instance, for all of Ireland's energy links to the EU, which have relied on British cross-channel connections. And I'd argue that the Channel Tunnel was ultimately successful because the idea of the tunnel has held people's imaginations. For nearly 200 years, it just seemed like something that should happen. It was something that could obviously make people's lives easier. The hard part was making such a long-term project successful in a changing world. So what makes infrastructure successful? Well, that is something that we think a lot about at Stripe, where our mission is to build economic infrastructure for the internet. We power millions of businesses, ranging from some of the largest companies in the world, all the way down to the smallest startups and solopreneurs. And our business is kind of like a transit network. Just as the purpose of a rail tunnel is to move goods and people, the purpose of Stripe's infrastructure is to allow businesses to store and move money in a way that's fast, functional, and frictionless. And we need to do that in a way that can grow and evolve alongside the internet to accommodate the needs of any type of business at any size. We also need to be able to integrate with the financial networks, both those of today and those that are yet to come. And this is one of the big advantages about infrastructure that isn't physical. It can adapt and change more quickly. And that brings us to what I want to focus on today: change. In fact, we've been working on a project in London and across Europe to re-engineer how bank transfers work around the world. We're building a system that dramatically improves the infrastructure underlying what is one of the oldest payment methods in the world, automating away millions of combined hours of manual administration. So how do we manage change like that in our infrastructure? Well, this is a framework that some of you may have heard of before. It's called pace layering. And it was introduced by Stuart Brand of the Long Now Foundation. Most famously, Brand discusses this concept in a book about watchmaking. Well, okay, that's not exactly true. It's not a book about watchmaking. He discusses it in a book about the clock of the long now, which is an attempt to build a mechanical clock using watchmaking techniques that can run uninterrupted for 10,000 years. And with such an audacious goal, they needed to consider not only the design, the building, and the maintenance of the clock, but also the deep structure that enables any process like that to continue over time. And that's the key concept of the pace layering framework, that the way we build things and operate in organizations can be broken down as part of a hierarchical system that's defined by the rate of change. So I'm going to use the Channel Tunnel to illustrate some of these points. At the top, you see fashion. It's the squiggly line, which illustrates how fads tend to come and go and change fast. The places people travel to or the reasons that people make the journey might change every year. Next is commerce. In the case of the tunnel, that's the market forces that dictate how many trains run, how frequently they run, and what goes on them. Then there's infrastructure. The tunnel itself, the rail lines, and the power transmission cables, they exist at this pace layer. Then there's governance, how we codify the culture and build processes so that we can work together. The tunnel was made possible by not only a private-public partnership, but also an international treaty between Britain and France, which has endured for decades. And next is culture. The tunnel was born out of an era of increased partnerships and globalization. And down at the bottom, you see the physical constraints, the matter and substance that literally shaped the project and dictated its needs. And the point here is that stuff at the top of the pace layers changes really rapidly, and the stuff at the bottom hardly changes at all over time. And if you're a parent, I think this framework might make intuitive sense to you. I mean, if you've ever had to explain to a child why things are the way they are, you quickly find yourself traversing many of these layers. Well, I am a proud parent, and here is a drawing that my daughter did of the framework. And I might be a little bit biased, but I think this version might be even better than the original. Well, we think about pace layers very often at Stripe when we're figuring out how our infrastructure and our company should evolve. Between the layers, there's a push and pull of creative tension, with change being the only constant. Governance models affect culture, just as cultural expectations can lead to changes in governance and so on. So, to explain how Stripe grew over our first decade, that's where I want to start, talking about the culture. Very early on, the founding team at Stripe made a decision that our company culture would be built not on an abstract set of philosophical values, but rather on a set of operating principles distilled from the behaviors of the most effective Stripes. And the very first operating principle that we established was users first. And if there's nothing else that you take away from this presentation, then I hope that you remember this principle. We emphasize it more than any other point during our new hire process, and we reinforce it at every company-wide meeting, where we bring in real customers every time to tell us what's working and what isn't. We're constantly making sure that we live out the principle of users first, because we know that it's not nearly enough to merely stick it on the wall. In fact, to illustrate that point, here's a set of values from another company: communication, integrity, excellence, and respect. Well, those actually seem like pretty good values to aspire to, but it's also important to remember which company they come from. I think that's a very good lesson for all of us. Nothing guarantees that our values will be lived at our companies unless they're also embodied by us and by everyone that we work with. So this orientation towards our users goes back to Stripe's original purpose. Stripe began in 2010 to solve a seemingly simple problem that our founders had experienced several times in their careers. It was really difficult for startups to start accepting payments online. And there were many reasons why. Banks often weren't interested in working with startups, payment networks had clunky or poorly documented integrations, compliance requirements could be confusing, and once you were actually able to accept payments in one market, you had to go through all the same laborious process all over again in order to expand into new markets. Payments online were far from a user's first experience. So in the early days, we focused on addressing the biggest barriers that prevented payments from working for users. We knew that the core API needed to be a durable piece of infrastructure, and that any changes we made to it would need to be additive and gradual to avoid placing the burden on users to adapt to us unless that was absolutely necessary. Before Stripe even had a product, we actually ended up rewriting the core API three times, to achieve the right level of functionality, adaptability, and simplicity. And when we did finally launch our first product, we were able to provide payments functionality to customers with only a few lines of code, because we took care of all the other pain points of implementation that we observed from them when we worked together. For instance, paperwork. Registering with a payments processor in the early days, it took tons of paperwork that startups just didn't have time to do. So we let them outsource the paperwork to us. We simply filled it out for them. Similarly, our founders would sometimes physically sit down with our users and write the code that they needed to get up and running with Stripe. Paul Graham calls this the Collison installation. That's the name of our founders, the Collisons. And it demonstrates the power of making things as simple and possible for the people you want to adopt your product. We also didn't assume that we knew everything there was to know about our users' pain points. We were really obsessed about detecting and fixing every suboptimal speed bump in the product. And in those early days, every single API error would trigger an email to our CEO's inbox, and every single support ticket would page our executives' cell phones. We pair-programmed those first Stripe integrations with our users, and to this day, the original IRC channel that we used to solicit and act on all this feedback from some of our earliest users has its spiritual successor. We still do it this way today on Discord. Working closely with our most opinionated users provides a really strong feedback loop that increases the speed at which we can adapt to our users' needs. By listening to those early users, we learned about problems adjacent to the ones that we wouldn't have identified ourselves. And then that meant that besides the Stripe API, we created Stripe.js. Stripe.js is a JavaScript library to collect card payment details from the browser and securely store them with Stripe, represented as a token, which can later be used to charge a card. And that helped users hand off the burden of PCI compliance and security to us initially. We store the credit card number so they didn't have to. So our users' first approach also applied to how we organized our internal processes. Think of this as the governance pace layer. For example, let's talk about our API design and review process, how we got the API working the way that I just explained. Our API design and review process is an example of how long-term thinking directly informs the way that we organize our work at Stripe. Stripe is an API company. Almost every aspect of our infrastructure is exposed to our users via APIs that they build into their products. And so to maximize the value our users can get from our APIs, it's important that they are as simple as possible, but also that they are composable. They need to work well together. And they need to be predictable. They need to behave the way that you'd expect, and also change as frequently or infrequently as the concepts that they represent in the real world. In fact, we're about to get fractal here. We think very hard when designing products at Stripe about which pace layer in our broader ecosystem each idea that we encode into the API sits at, so we can plan for faster and slower rates of change over time. At the governance layer, there are the laws and standards that economic infrastructure needs to comply with. This is stuff like GDPR and anti-money laundering regulations. And above that, we have the core concepts in our API. Stuff like accounts and transactions. Those are universal, and they won't change very often. And then at the top layer, we have the concepts that we in the industry are innovating on. These are intentionally designed to change faster in concert with our first users. So early in the design process, we scrutinize our plans with a standardized API review, which keeps exactly those principles in mind. The API review team itself draws trained reviewers from all across Stripe, creating a cross-functional team that can also standardize best practices, share knowledge, and advocate for change when that change is necessary. And the number one principle basis underlying all our work is a focus, surprise, surprise, on designing for users. So we typically try to get an early version of any product out into the world as a closed beta as quickly as possible so we can get feedback from them and then iterate to the right product to launch. But keeping pace layering in mind helps us make sure that we live up to our commitments, like not promising users functionality that we know we can't deliver at scale. And over those first years, we refined our mission to build economic infrastructure for the entire internet. Now, I hope I've stressed enough that building infrastructure and designing for the future means being responsive to users' needs. One of our early users was a ride-sharing company that was quickly scaling. They needed a way to both accept payments from riders and immediately pay out money to their drivers. To solve this for them, we saw the pain points, we iterated and we developed two products. Stripe Connect, which handles bi-directional payments in a multi-party online marketplace, and Payouts, which provides drivers the ability to decide when they want to get paid out, typically within a few hours of a ride. Today, these products are the economic infrastructure for several online marketplaces and many gig economy companies. They're also still being used by the ride-sharing company that led us to develop them in the first place, Lyft. So that was the first 5 years of Stripe. But like many other companies, the true challenge isn't how you build the first product, but what comes afterwards. And as I said a few minutes ago, this story is fundamentally about change. As we grew, we went from supporting thousands of users to supporting millions, from primarily solving problems for small companies to counting massive Fortune 100 companies and online platforms as our biggest users. And along the way, we experienced the same growing pains that many of you have probably experienced in your own companies. We've had to adapt to a changing user base, scale our technology, and navigate the challenges that come with being a much larger and more complex company than we used to be. We also learned from the companies that preceded us, and we've been really emboldened by the fact that what we've learned has often validated our approach and many of those operating principles that we already had. For example, we would often talk publicly about how important it is to be deliberate about how your company grows, and to build the kind of corporate culture that always looks to make the right choices, not just the easy ones. Well, one of the biggest challenges we've had was the launch of our remote engineering hub. If we rewind a few years, in 2019, it seemed like the future of remote work was here, but that it just wasn't evenly distributed yet. We had all the tools that we still do today: Slack, GitHub, Zoom, everything you need to make remote work work. And by the way, all of those companies are also Stripe users. But still, there was a hesitancy to embrace the technology that we already had available and trust that we could work just as well from anywhere. Like many companies, we already had major engineering hubs all over the world with hundreds of high-impact distributed employees, so we knew that engineers could contribute and collaborate effectively on creative work regardless of physical proximity. And before the pandemic, 99.74% of the software engineers in the world lived outside the metro areas of Stripe's first 4 hubs, which were in San Francisco, Dublin, Seattle, and Singapore. So we decided to launch remote work as a 5th hub, investing in remote just like we would any office. And we quickly found that we should have done it earlier. This is because we really quickly saw that remote employees keep us even closer to our users. They live in more places. They can see the struggles and successes of local businesses all over the world. They also know the pains of having slow or unreliable internet connections, and they understand the importance of having access to a global payments infrastructure. As we grew in scale, we also found that being distributed put us in a better position than others to solve a range of business problems that our users faced. For example, many of our customers eventually reach a stage in their growth where they begin to think about international expansion. But not understanding the intricacies of local consumer behavior, business norms, and even banking systems, it really holds them back. For instance, if your company wants to start operating in Japan, you may not know about the importance of Japanese convenience stores known as konbini. Konbini payments are an online-offline hybrid model where the customer places an order online and then receives a payment code and confirmation number, which they bring to a local convenience store to actually make a cash payment. And that's the second most popular method of payment in Japan, accounting for almost 1 in 5 online purchases. Now, on a certain level, the Konbini network is doing the same thing for Japanese consumers that we do at Stripe. It's offering people a way to do business that is secure, reliable, and responsive to their needs. Our job is to be the bridge between that network and all of our users. At Stripe, we find that solving this problem was so important that it needed to become the foundation of our business. We created our Global Payments and Treasury Network, or GPTN, that today connects banks, payment methods, and money transfer methods. It also defines a set of user-facing abstractions, the Stripe API, that are used to build many of our products, and it functions as a kind of operating system for money movement internally. Building the GPTN required a massive lift from our team to get off the ground. But we knew that if we wanted to build enduring infrastructure, we needed to be able to support the growth of our users for years. As we grew, our ability to solve problems improved, but we also had to be much more active when it came to soliciting feedback. By 2019, we had multiple teams across the company continuously talking to and learning from users. And in fact, we encourage everyone within Stripe to talk to our users in whichever capacity they operate. We'd even ask users to come to our company-wide meetings, and anytime they did, we would grill them for feedback. Genuinely, every time we have a customer in, they show up and we ask them for all the feedback they have and how we can be better. And these foundational aspects of our organization seemed important even as we were creating them. Multiple feedback channels, remote work, and a shared set of operating principles. But like every other company, our ability to execute would be tested by what was to come in 2020. Existential crises and black swan events are a rare but unavoidable fact of life. And going back to the Channel Tunnel, it too faced existential crises. In the 1980s, political leadership almost killed the project in favor of a tunnel for cars and lorries. Shortly after it opened, there was a massive fire. No one knows what future hazards lurk ahead, but we know from history that useful infrastructure often has incredible endurance. Among many other lessons, the last 2 years have made infrastructure that we all took for granted plainly visible, warts and all, and some of that is physical infrastructure, like global supply chains and medical facilities, but increasingly it's also the digital infrastructure that our lives and livelihoods depend on. The pandemic was a massive existential stress test to all of that. And the pandemic didn't break the world's economy, but it did send out shockwaves that continue to ripple today. From disrupted supply chains to worker shortages, there's really so much uncertainty. As people spent more time at home and services like online shopping and food delivery became an everyday necessity, we had to scale quickly. We saw urgent needs to build onto services that we already had, like Connect that I mentioned earlier. Here's an example. We launched Stripe Express, a mobile app built on top of our core Connect primitives. And that handles onboarding, payouts management, reporting, taxes, and all the common things a platform needs, whether it's built for creators, gig workers, or it's an online platform like WooCommerce. And it's trying to help people from the offline economy go online. Having everyone online also means that we had to work even harder to get feedback from our users. But sometimes you can tell what people think just by reading what they're talking about on Twitter. We love it when people tell us about the friction they run into using Stripe or running their businesses online. I'm afraid my clicker has stopped working. Okay, here we go. For example, did you know that 37% of small businesses actually earn their first euro before they even have a business banking account? Well, recently Shopify launched a product called Balance. It's powered by Stripe Treasury, and it provides a simple money management account for their customers' online businesses. Their customers can access the money they make through Shopify in the same interface as their store. They get paid faster, pay fewer fees, and they have another fewer point of friction in their lives. So you've heard the term fintech revolution. Well, this is what it looks like. Shopify is doing for their customers what Stripe does for users like Shopify, helping them get their businesses up and running with less friction and helping them move money faster. Another common complaint was about taxes. We find that half of our users said that changing tax requirements were hard to follow. For example, in the UK, if a gingerbread man has just 2 chocolate eyes, it's legally a biscuit and it's tax exempt. But if that gingerbread man is also wearing chocolate trousers or a shirt, it's now legally taxed at a standard rate of 20%. So I hope you can begin to appreciate the kinds of edge cases that arise when you're doing that kind of business across 130 countries and dealing with all manner of baked goods and sartorial combinations. This combination of pervasiveness and complexity pointed towards the need for a convenient solution that worked at scale. So our Dublin team developed Stripe Tax, which automates tax collection and calculation. It tells businesses where they need to collect taxes and creates comprehensive reports to make filing taxes easy. But we also recognize that we weren't the only people with good ideas about how to extend our infrastructure, which led to our most recent initiative that lets people build and host apps directly on Stripe. The Stripe App Marketplace allows developers to build and sell software and services to any business that uses the Stripe dashboard. Right now, the Stripe App Marketplace includes apps from companies like ChargeDesk, Intercom, Vayu, Xero, and many more. But we want to make this a platform where any developer can connect directly with our payments and financial services infrastructure to solve our combined users' problems. Just like our payments users can leverage Stripe to access new markets, developers can now decide what the future of the fintech revolution looks like. We're really excited to open up the platform, allowing developers to customize Stripe in ways that have never been possible before, while leveraging the full power of our APIs. Thinking back to our pace layers, this also represents a big shift in how we need to evolve our infrastructure to maintain the security and reliability that we're historically known for in a more open app ecosystem. And I can't wait to see what you'll all build on top of this infrastructure. As I wrap up my talk, I want to highlight one last point about governance and how it can ensure that shared infrastructure can be trusted over very long periods of time. This image is from a meeting of the Tribunal de las Aguas de la Vega de la Valencia, or the Water Court of the Plains of Valencia. It's the world's oldest judicial body. It was established in 960 CE, and it's operated continuously since then in an area called La Huerta outside of Valencia, Spain. The farming community here is linked by an efficient gravity-fed irrigation system, and every farmer has the same access and rights to their share. Over thousands of years, governments have come and gone, the crops grown in the fields have changed, but the water court has remained. And I think the secret to that longevity of that organization is that the farmers in the area are inextricably linked by infrastructure, the canals and ditches that irrigate their fields, and a shared culture of their farming community. Which brings us to the present day and how we deal with this challenge at Stripe. We build for our users today, but we think about what our platform should look like into the future and how we can have the right abstractions that can be supported for a very long time. We provide an infrastructure that's open to more developers, but safe and reliable for our mutual customers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. David, wait a second, if you wouldn't mind. You are going downstairs to do an AMA, is that correct?
Right. Yes, the open air stage will be doing an AMA right after the talk.
Excellent. So go over there if you have any questions. Another big thank you to David. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, that's great. Make sure to check out the WeAreDevelopers booth throughout the day, as more speakers will be doing their AMAs there. And in a little bit, we're going to be talking about the snowball effect of open source. Looking forward to that. In the meantime, enjoy yourselves. Have a good one.
Are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit